This week, our Grid Down Cooking Challenge reminded us about the dangers of carbon monoxide poisoning. Hi, I'm Jonathan, the Provident Prepper. We have completed week 3 of our Grid Down Cooking Challenge with a few safety tips that you need to know. Week 3 of our 30-day Grid Down Cooking Challenge is in the books, and here is our report.
This week, I remembered how much I really love to cook with charcoal, and we'll talk more about that.
Let's start with the indoor cooking.
I've learned that the butane stove is really handy. Quite frankly, it's not a really good emergency preparedness tool for the long term because the canisters are so expensive, but it makes it so easy to quickly turn on something when I'm cooking indoors, as long as we have adequate ventilation. Crepes turn out fantastic on a butane stove. And one of the things I had forgotten to do was to defrost the fruit that needed to go inside the crepes. So I put them in the candle oven, which turned out fantastic because while I'm making the crepes, there was just enough heat produced by the candles to slowly thaw the fruit, making them perfect when it came time to eat the crepes.
And as a treat for me, Kylene made my favorite applesauce cake in the HERC oven.
Fuel conservation is critical when we're talking about emergency cooking. It's important that we take best advantage of the fuels that we have so that they will last us for a longer period of time and so that we can store less to accomplish the same job. In this picture, you'll notice that we took dry pinto beans and we soaked them overnight, and then we brought them up to pressure in the pressure cooker. The cool thing about cooking beans in the pressure cooker is as long as they've been soaked overnight, I can add my salt and all my spices and everything right at the beginning. Whereas if you do it on the stovetop, you really have to wait for them to get soft before you add all the spices and the salt. Using the combination of the pressure cooker and retained heat is a fabulous combination. We brought the pressure cooker of dry beans up to pressure where the rocker just barely starts to rock. And then we immediately took it from the stove and tucked it inside of the Wonder Oven, trying to make sure that the little rocker on the top remained level so that we didn't lose any of the pressure that was in there. And then we covered it up, tucked it in a blanket again, and just set it aside while we went and did all of our activities on Sunday.
When we came home around 3 in the afternoon, it was still at 190 degrees, which is well above safe cooking temperature.
We used these beans to make a fantastic taco salad for dinner. And because I'm being really lazy about cooking over the next few days, we just continued to warm up the leftovers and use them in tortillas and things like that so that I didn't have to cook as much.
On Monday morning, I made my famous oatmeal with apples in the thermal cooker. I brought the water up to boil on a butane stove. I added the ingredients, stirred them in and let it come back to a boil, and then immediately put the lid on and put it in the thermal cooker. Then I went off and did my things while it cooked for another 45 minutes before the family was ready to eat.
Taco salad is one of our favorites. This night on the butane stove, I took some rotisserie chicken and beans and created this delicious topping for a taco salad. And since I have no access to a microwave, the frozen veggies are heated over the butane stove.
When the safety engineer saw this, he was a little concerned.
Okay, I think it's just fine. This is the Kettle Hobo stove, and although the teapot is a little bit large for it, it's actually very stable, even though my engineer husband has some concerns about it. I love heating up my water using the safe heat because I can just light it and I don't have to babysit it. I come back 10 or 15 minutes later, the water is really nice and ready for my tea.
Just know that I'll keep a good eye on her.
This is some of the fire cider that I made, and it was time to add the honey to sweeten it so that we could start using it, but I couldn't get the honey to dissolve, but I didn't want to heat this fire cider up very hot, so I put it in a double broiler with the safe heat underneath so that it could just gradually warm it. The safe heat is great for melting butter. I needed some melted for a recipe that I was making, and it just did the great job without burning it.
Now we'll talk a little more about the outdoor cooking. We've had some fun this week.
An Applesauce charcoal reflector oven is a fantastic tool for cooking outdoors that's inexpensive and does a really good job. I miss my oven. I bake a lot of things in the oven, and because it's been too hot to fire up the wood-burning stove, my only option has been the HERC oven, which tends to cook at a little bit lower temperature, and I have to watch it very carefully. One of the things I love about the charcoal reflector ovens is that I can set them up outside, and I can walk away, and I don't have to tend them. These brownies turned out really well in the charcoal reflector oven. I didn't have any problems with them burning. If you'd like to learn how to make your own charcoal apple box reflector oven, click on the card in the upper right-hand corner.
Also in the apple box oven, we created this wonderful dish of potatoes and onions. You might notice the red blanket on top. That just adds additional insulation that conserves fuel. We also enjoyed using our paper box charcoal reflector oven. This oven is a little bit smaller, but still big enough for a 9x13 pan. So it works really well with less fuel because it is smaller. For detailed instructions on how to build your own paper box charcoal reflector oven, click on the card. This shows us cooking some funeral potatoes in our paper box oven. I'm not sure why they're called funeral potatoes. It sounds kind of morbid to me, but they were very good.
If you notice, we have 2 pans in here instead of the traditional 9x13 pan. And the reason for that is because we were taking one to somebody else and one for our family. The standard muffin pan that holds 12 muffins fits perfectly in a paper box reflector oven. Propane is a fantastic fuel, and it's only a few steps outside my back door to be able to use it to cook different items like these veggies and eggs. Jonathan keeps encouraging me to take those few extra steps and walk outside the door because for some reason he feels like the teapot is much more stable on this propane stove than it is on the safe heat inside the house.
I'm glad she's seeing reason.
And Kenny has discovered how wonderful quesadillas turn out on the propane stove. And now for my inconvenience report. We are still eating more cold food than normal just because it takes more time to heat things up and cook it, and we're all still alive. It's been too warm this week to use the wood-burning stove, and so that has kind of been eliminated from our resources for this week. I'm not able to accurately time the food. When I was making the funeral potatoes, I actually had to call the family that we were taking them to and tell them that we were going to be a half an hour late. Because it's really easy with my oven. I know that it should take me 30 minutes or 40 minutes at this temperature and my dish is going to be done. When you're using some of these other devices, you just can't time it as well. With the Apple Box oven, we're adjusting the number of charcoals to get the perfect temperature to bake whatever it is we're baking. But the outside temperature affects the heat inside the oven, and there's all kinds of variables. And I am sure that eventually I'll get really good at this. It just takes me longer to figure things out. And those potatoes that you see in the sun oven, I was so excited because I really wanted baked potatoes. They just never got done. And it was 3 o'clock and they still weren't done. And I had to go someplace, and I actually forgot about them until dark. And so when I went out there, they still hadn't finished cooking all the way, and we weren't able to eat them, and I had to feed them to the chickens. So sometimes we are just having little failures like that. This week, the sun isn't performing for us as well as it did last week.
This was another episode of Not Enough Sunshine. Here we are cooking a pot of potatoes, but we just didn't get enough sun to actually get it done. So we ended up finishing cooking them in the HERC oven, which worked out well.
It just meant that instead of eating at the time I had originally planned, we were eating a couple of hours later, which when you're busy people, it really impacts your schedule.
As part of our safety report for this week, we're going to talk about carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a deadly hazard. We've talked a little bit in this video about cooking with charcoal briquettes. This can never be done in your home or even in your garage. This has to be outside where that carbon monoxide can dissipate and leave. Just for kicks, we used our carbon monoxide detector and put it right near the vent of one of our reflector ovens. As you can see on the screen there, it was at 344 parts per million. When we looked at it initially, it was well over 400 parts per million, which is very, very dangerous. You can see on the information there that 400 parts per million is getting quite life-threatening. Frontal headaches with 1 to 2 hours, life-threatening after 3 hours. And so this is not something you want to have in your home.
Anytime you are cooking and there is a risk of carbon monoxide, make sure that you have one of these little digital readouts so that you can monitor it. Whenever we're cooking indoors, you will see in a lot of our pictures, it's sitting right there in that windowsill, right by what we're cooking, because we want to know if we're doing anything that produces carbon monoxide and how much. If you look, the low levels are around 50 parts per million. Anytime you reach over 101 parts per million, you need to do something to mitigate those risks and change whatever it is you're doing so that you keep your family safe.
And generally those levels should be at 0. There should be no carbon monoxide in your home.
Anytime you are using the HERC oven, you need to make sure that you monitor it, because there is a risk that that paraffin will ignite and you can have a small contained fire. The first time this happened, this was a little bit scary for me because I wasn't expecting it. I hadn't read the directions. Surprise, surprise. It is very easy to handle as long as you have been operating the oven safely. You don't have any flammable material around it. You just pull the burner out from underneath the oven. You can put a wet dish rag on top of it, or there are little metal plates that come with the oven that you can use to smother the flames. Not a big deal unless you don't see that it happens. So you need to make sure that you keep an eye on it.
This is our fuel usage report for this past week. As you can see, butane is still the thing that we're using the most, and we're actually talking about how we can stop using that as much and branch out more. But it is very, very convenient.
But it is not sustainable. That's the problem. It's expensive and not sustainable.
By sustainable, we mean once that fuel is gone, you're probably not going to be able to get more. So we do want to focus on some things that are more sustainable. The sun oven.
Wood is very sustainable. With the rocket stove, it only takes little twigs in order to fuel it, which every year when we prune, we have plenty of fuel to be able to do that. I can't produce more canisters of butane.
You can see that propane was used to cook 3 things this week. It is more cost effective and we can store it in larger bottles, but again, it is not sustainable. Once that is gone, in an emergency situation, it may be difficult to get more. We used the solar oven a couple of times this week, but again, the sun just hasn't been quite as good. Safe heat, we did use a fair amount.
And we still haven't even gone through 1 can yet. And we use safe heat to light those charcoals. We'll talk about that in another video, but it's a fantastic way to easily start your charcoals.
The candle oven was used 5 times this week, and we used about 20 tea lights for that. Our retained heat cooking we really love. We want to use that even more than we have. As you can see, this week we started using charcoal.
And charcoal is an amazing fuel. You can make charcoal yourself, but it is so inexpensive to buy and safe to store that it is a really good option for only outdoor cooking, but it is a great fuel for outdoor cooking.
As you can see there, we only used 46 briquettes, so you can see that it is very inexpensive to use. We invite you to Google the ProvidentPrepper.org to see the basis of this challenge, the 30-day Grid Down Emergency Cooking Challenge.
And on the ProvidentPrepper.org, there are a couple of fantastic posts about using charcoal, as well as these videos on YouTube, Practical Emergency Cooking Fuel and Cool Charcoal Cookers. These videos explore what the best types of charcoal are to store for emergency situations, how to store it safely, and some of the great ways that you can use charcoal in different cooking devices.
It is vital that you understand how to use all of your alternative cooking devices safely. A disaster is a really bad time for you to need emergency services. And now for the question of the day. Have you ever had a close call with carbon monoxide? Comment below, and thanks for being part of the solution.